Street Fighter 4 should not exist, but what exactly do I even mean by that considering the seismic impact this title had on gaming? Street Fighter 4 is a monumental entry in gaming history, heralding the triumphant return of the Street Fighter brand to mainstream prominence. This title masterfully bridged the gap between the classic 2D mechanics that defined its predecessors and the fresh, visually striking 3D art style that captivated a new generation of players. It focuses on precise gameplay, a legendary character roster, and the introduction of innovative mechanics and combo systems. Together, these elements brought depth and excitement that revitalized competitive gaming. The game didn't just reignite the franchise, it laid the groundwork for the modern esports scene as we know it. However, before it re-established Capcom's dominance in the realm of fighting games, there was a time when it seemed like this title would never come to be. So join me today as we not only celebrate what makes Street Fighter 4 so significant and special, but also delve into the surprising story of how this game came to exist against all odds, and ultimately become a massive success. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the crazy rise of Street Fighter 4. Yeah! Street Fighter. As of 2025, the franchise is thriving, with Street Fighter 6 standing tall as one of the most popular titles in the fighting game scene, something fans certainly would have not expected in the past. Even better, I've got some fantastic news for you. Right now you can snag a massive discount on the game, including its Ultimate Edition, which features the Year 1 Character Pass. Plus, using my links you can access thousands of gaming deals, like 32% off the Year 2 Ultimate Pass, with the iconic Mai Shiranui soon joining the roster as a fully playable character. Wah-wah-wee-wah! Treat yourself to these amazing savings, and here's to kicking off the new year in style. Happy gaming and happy shopping. The rise of Street Fighter 4 is a fascinating tale, especially when considering the state of the franchise prior to its release. The Street Fighter series experienced a dramatic trajectory, a meteoric rise, followed by a gradual decline in popularity. But to truly appreciate this resurgence, we need to travel back to 1987 and the debut of the original Street Fighter. While incredibly rudimentary to look back at today, the first Street Fighter was both a commercial success and it was critically well received. Sure, it didn't introduce all the fighting game tropes we now associate with the genre, however it was a trailblazer for its time and ticked all of Capcom's boxes for success. Holding these accolades in mind, a sequel was an obvious next step, as the potential to capitalise on the franchise's momentum was clear. This meant that in 1989, Capcom began working on a new project, at one point titled Street Fighter 89. This side-scrolling beat-em-up, inspired heavily by Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, was shown at arcade trade shows. Despite being positioned as a sequel to a hit game, criticism arose that it was too much of a departure from the original. So, as a result, it was rebranded as Final Fight, distancing it from the series entirely and starting off a respectful legacy in its own right. But you all know the real sequel would not be far off. The true sequel came in 1991 with Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior, the arcade game that became a cultural phenomenon. Its popularity not only cemented the series' legacy but also rejuvenated the struggling arcade industry, ushering in a renaissance period for arcades after years of decline. From here, the history of the Street Fighter franchise takes a wild turn. Rather than diving straight into the development of Street Fighter 3, the logical next step for the series, Capcom instead focused on releasing multiple revisions of Street Fighter 2. By 1994, the game had been updated an incredible 4 times, culminating in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. With all of these iterations, a crazy amount of merchandise, and even a live-action blockbuster, Capcom was clearly determined to milk the game for everything it was worth. Past this point, one might think this would pave the way for the long-awaited Street Fighter 3, but Capcom had other plans. Instead of delivering the true sequel fans were clamouring for, they held off, saving that milestone for a later date. In its place, we got this. Capcom introduced Street Fighter Alpha. This wasn't a sequel or even a prequel, but rather what was marketed as a midquel, set between the events of Street Fighter and Street Fighter 2. The roster featured a mix of characters from both games, along with a few newcomers, giving fans something fresh while maintaining ties to the series' roots. But fans would still not get an official sequel yet. Like Street Fighter 2 before it, Street Fighter Alpha wasn't a one-and-done release. It saw multiple revisions, including Alpha 2 and Alpha 3, which fine-tuned the mechanics and expanded the roster. Capcom clearly had a strategy: keep refining and re-releasing rather than rushing forward. While the Alpha series was in full swing, other Street Fighter titles were also being released, but Street Fighter 3 was still nowhere to be seen. Among these were the Street Fighter the movie games, tie-ins to the infamous live-action film. These games, which featured digitized graphics similar to Mortal Kombat, were poorly received and did little to bolster the franchise's reputation. In 1996, however, Capcom struck gold with X-Men vs Street Fighter, an exhilarating crossover that pitted iconic characters from the X-Men universe against fan-favourite Street Fighter fighters. The game was a hit, spawning the immensely popular Capcom vs series that would go on to become a staple of fighting game history. But that's not all. That same year, Capcom ventured into new territory with Street Fighter EX, the first game in the series to use 3D polygonal graphics. Interestingly, this game wasn't developed by Capcom itself, but by Eureka, as Capcom felt they lacked the resources to do justice to a 3D Street Fighter in-house. Street Fighter EX was an important milestone, especially as the rise of the Sony PlayStation brought Tekken to prominence. With its cutting-edge 3D graphics and accessible pick-up-and-play controls, Tekken quickly became the dominant fighting game, offering a fresh alternative that drew players away from the 2D fighting scene. This shift forced Capcom to explore new ideas to stay relevant in an evolving market. By 1997, the success of Tekken and other emerging fighting games finally pushed Capcom to get their act together and release the third chronological entry in the Street Fighter series. Finally, Street Fighter 3 was a game fans had been demanding for 6 long years. However, by this point, many players had grown tired of the franchise and the sheer number of spin-offs, midquels and revisions, which left audiences feeling confused about where the series even stood. Despite its name, Street Fighter 3 was far from the third game in the series. It was closer to the 20th, which meant Capcom needed to do something truly special to convince fans this was the rightful successor to Street Fighter 2, the very game that had built their empire. Fans and critics alike had high expectations. They wanted Street Fighter 3 to deliver their favourite characters and mechanics, all presented in cutting-edge 3D. Capcom, however, went in the opposite direction, doubling down on a 2D aesthetic, and initially planning to exclude the classic Street Fighter 2 cast entirely. After Backlash, Ryu and Ken were reluctantly added before the game's release, but it was clear Capcom was determined to chart their own course. Despite whatever you think of this one, not as many played this game back in the day as Capcom would have liked, even though that on the surface, Street Fighter 3 delivered arguably the most stunning 2D sprite work the world had ever seen. Unfortunately, 2D graphics were becoming a relic of the past in an industry obsessed with 3D visuals. The game's small, mostly unfamiliar roster and complex gameplay mechanics catered to hardcore enthusiasts rather than the mass market, where the real money all was. Adding to this game's issues, the advanced 2D sprites also posed a significant problem for home console ports. With consoles now focused on polygon-based gaming, Street Fighter 3 couldn't make the jump to home systems until the release of a Sega Dreamcast. Even then, while later revisions expanded the roster and improved character variety, the game struggled to capture widespread interest. Ultimately, Street Fighter 3 failed to connect with casual players, leaving many to see it as a niche product rather than the triumphant sequel they'd been waiting for. Despite the waning interest in the Street Fighter brand and 2D fighting games as a whole, Capcom found success with the Marvel vs. Capcom series and Capcom vs. SNK games, which built strong followings and proved that there was still an audience for innovative fighting games. However, by this point, Capcom had squeezed just about everything they could out of 2D fighters. Next, they chose to begin developing a game that brought characters from different Capcom franchises together, but this time in 3D. This led to the development of Capcom Fighting All-Stars, a bold attempt to take the company's fighting games into a new dimension. Ultimately though, after receiving negative feedback during beta testing, the game was cancelled in August 2003. Not all would be completely lost though, as many elements of this unfinished product were repurposed in future Capcom games. One such title was Capcom Fighting Evolution, a game we've discussed on this channel before. Released as a half-hearted salvage operation of Capcom Fighting All-Stars, it was the last fighting game from Capcom to feature Street Fighter characters rendered as 2D sprites. Producer Yoshinori Ono admitted that the game was rushed and suffered from balancing issues due to its cobbled-together mechanics and the inclusion of various gameplay systems from multiple franchises. The failure of both Capcom Fighting All-Stars and Capcom Fighting Evolution marked the start of a dark age for Capcom fighting games. Once a company that churned out half a dozen fighters a year, Capcom now went 4 long years without releasing any major titles in the genre, a stark contrast to its former glory days. By this point, it looked like Street Fighter 4 may very well never exist. During this period of uncertainty, the future of the Street Fighter franchise was anything but clear, and Capcom executives were deeply divided on its direction. Yoshinori Ono, a producer at Capcom, pitched the concept of Street Fighter 4 to Keiji Inafune, Capcom's head of research and development. However, the mid-2000s saw prevailing belief within the company that no new entry in the Street Fighter series should ever be made. This was largely because many viewed the franchise as burnt out, with its glory days firmly behind it. For example, the last new game to carry the Street Fighter name was Street Fighter EX3, released in the year 2000. Unfortunately, it was entirely overshadowed by the hugely popular Tekken Tag Tournament, further cementing the notion that Street Fighter was losing relevance. This, combined with the underwhelming performances of Street Fighter 3 and Capcom Fighting Evolution, left the series at its lowest point. Despite the dark ages falling upon us, interestingly, however, there was a glimmer of hope. Fans might have been largely ignoring the newer Street Fighter titles, but Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting was receiving a surprising resurgence in relevance. This was because the game received an overwhelmingly positive response when it launched on Xbox Live Arcade. This unexpected success proved that there was still life in the brand, but not in the direction Capcom had taken over the last decade. You see, by then, retro gaming was beginning to surge in popularity. Nostalgia was driving players back to the classics of their youth, while frustration with the gaming industry's obsession with flashy graphics over substance was growing. Many developers seemed to have lost sight of what made games fun in the first place, leaving gamers yearning for the timeless appeal of well-crafted gameplay, a factor that Street Fighter had once mastered. This combination of nostalgia and renewed appreciation for simpler, engaging games hinted at a potential path forward for the iconic franchise. With Street Fighter 2 selling well once again, Keiji Inafune ordered a dramatic shift in direction, finally greenlighting the production of Street Fighter 4. The new game would take heavy inspiration from Street Fighter 2, aiming to recapture the magic that had once defined the franchise. Yoshinori Ono, who had previously worked as a sound management director on Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and more infamously as a producer of Capcom Evolution, he was appointed as the producer for this ambitious new project, eventually resulting in this classic game. Still, while this is the beloved game we all remember and have played, interestingly, this wasn't the first project to be pitched to Street Fighter 4, as another concept carried the working title of Street Fighter 4, or more specifically, Street Fighter 4 Flashback, an idea designed to reflect on its strong ties to Capcom's past. Much of the conceptual groundwork on the game that was never to be was influenced by David Sirlin, a designer who later worked on Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix. Sirlin's pitch for Street Fighter 4 included a 2.5D gameplay style and a roster made up of all the Street Fighter 2 characters alongside Sakura and a handful of new fighters. He also envisioned an ambitious single-player mode inspired by God of War, where players would control Ryu in a third-person 3D action-adventure. Additionally, Sirlin proposed bundling the game with the original versions of Street Fighter 2 and a 3D remake of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. One of his boldest ideas was simplifying the control scheme to make the game more accessible, addressing the increasingly complex mechanics that had alienated mainstream players over the years. While many of Sirlin's ideas were ultimately not implemented, his push for easier controls influenced another project Capcom was working on at the same time, Tatsunoko vs Capcom, a crossover fighting game for the Wii. This parallel development ensured that at least part of Sirlin's vision found its way into Capcom's lineup, even though the game that would carry the name Street Fighter 4 would evolve into something entirely different. The finalised version of Street Fighter 4 was a collaborative effort between Capcom and DIMPS, a company founded on the 6th of March the year 2000 by former SNK and Capcom employees, including Street Fighter co-creator Takashi Nishiyama and Hiroshi Matsumoto. Nishiyama, often considered the godfather of fighting games, created the original Street Fighter in 1987. After leaving Capcom for SNK, he played a pivotal role in the creation of Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting and King of Fighters. Given his legacy, involving DIMPS in the development of Street Fighter 4 was a logical and inspired decision, delivering somewhat of a homecoming for the man. The collaboration between Capcom and DIMPS was clearly defined. According to producer Yoshinori Ono, Capcom handled the game's concepts, counters and character movement, while DIMPS focused on programming and balancing. Former Capcom community manager Seth Killian recalled playing an early build of Street Fighter 4 in 2006, but admitted he wasn't initially impressed. He reflects, "While I was ecstatic that the game was going to exist, my first impression wasn't great. They had 2 characters and a cast for testing, but the transition to 3D models was very difficult. But he worked hard to make sure the community had many chances to try it before release. By the time we launched in 2009, everyone felt confident that Street Fighter 4 had the magic needed to get people street fighting again." The final design of Street Fighter 4 blended modern visuals with classic gameplay. Characters and backgrounds were rendered in 3D, but the action unfolded on a traditional 2D plane, staying true to Street Fighter 2. To add a fresh twist, the game included a dynamic camera that shifted during certain moments, capturing the action from dramatic angles and giving fights a more cinematic flair. This combination of nostalgia and innovation would prove essential in revitalising the series and cementing its place in modern gaming once again. This blending of old and new techniques was nothing unfamiliar to the Street Fighter franchise, as similar ideas have been implemented in the EX series. During the development of Street Fighter 4, there was even a period when the game was set to feature 3D hitboxes. However, these proved less precise than the pixel-perfect 2D hitboxes of earlier titles, leading to the developers reverting to the tried-and-true method to maintain the accuracy players expected. One of Street Fighter 4's most striking features is its 3-dimensional art style. A lot had changed in the 8 years since the release of Street Fighter EX3, and by 2008, advancements in technology allowed developers to make 3D games truly shine. The game's distinctive look was inspired by Arc System Works' Battle Fantasia. Art director and character designer Daigo Ikeno deliberately avoided photorealistic visuals, reasoning that such styles aged poorly over time. Drawing from his previous experience on Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Ikeno opted for a hand-drawn aesthetic, punctuated with bold visual effects like ink smudges and sprays during fights. This decision gave the game a unique and timeless style, one that stood out as both modern and nostalgic. The soundtrack for Street Fighter 4 was composed by Hideyuki Fukasawa, who previously worked on the Onimusha series. The music masterfully blended new compositions with rearranged versions of classic tracks, appealing to longtime fans while injecting fresh energy into the series. Street Fighter 4 first hit Japanese arcades in July 2008, with North American and European arcades importing the machine shortly after in August. The game ran on the Taito Type X2 board, housed in sleek Taito Vuelix cabinets. This hardware marked a significant evolution for the franchise, offering network capabilities that allow players on separate machines to battle via local area network connections. This innovative feature brought a modern edge to the arcade experience, solidifying Street Fighter 4 as a groundbreaking title in the series' storied history. The arcade version of Street Fighter 4 was met with widespread acclaim in Japan, earning the title of Best Game of 2008 from the editorial staff of Arcadia magazine. It also won accolades for Best Graphics, Best Production, and the coveted Reader's Choice Award. To top it off, the iconic character Ryu claimed the #1 spot in the magazine's top 20 characters of 2008. The game soon transitioned to home consoles, launching globally on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in February 2009, with a Windows version following in the summer of that same year. But what for the narrative? Well, in true Street Fighter fashion, Street Fighter 4 featured a loosely constructed story that ironically made the series' timeline even more convoluted. Despite being the 4th mainline entry, it's yet another midquel, much like Street Fighter Alpha. Chronologically, the events of Street Fighter 4 take place between Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 3, occurring shortly after M. Bison's fateful encounter with Akuma at the end of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. While the story's importance is debatable, it serves its purpose, shaping the roster and justifying the return of fan-favourite characters. The original arcade version featured all 12 fighters from Street Fighter II The World Warrior, alongside a handful of new fighters, ensuring a mix of nostalgia and novelty for players. The new roster of Street Fighter IV introduced a variety of fresh characters of the franchise. Among them was Abel, a French mixed martial artist with a mysterious past, C. Viper, a female American spy and single mum who brought a modern high-tech flair to the game, Rufus, a comically rotund kung fu fighter, adding a humorous touch with his mission to prove himself as the best fighter in America, and El Fuerte, a Mexican luchador and dreadful wannabe gourmet chef who charmed players with his energetic personality and signature battle cry, "It's super dynamic cooking time."
It's super dynamic cooking time!
The game also introduced a new main villain, Seth, a powerful figure with a modified body created through advanced technology. Familiar faces made appearances too, with Akuma returning as a secret final boss, and Goken, Akuma's older brother, making his playable debut. Goken's inclusion was a nod to the infamous Shenlong hoax, a mistranslation from Street Fighter II that had long fueled rumours about a hidden character. When Street Fighter IV transitioned from arcades to home consoles, additional characters were added to the roster. Fan favourites Fei Long and Cammy from Super Street Fighter II returned, alongside Rose and Sakura from the Street Fighter Alpha series. Jen, a character who originally debuted in the first Street Fighter game but gained prominence in Street Fighter Alpha, also made his way back, further expanding the diverse lineup, delivering an awesome mix of fighters. As previously mentioned, Yoshinori Ono's vision for Street Fighter IV was to create a modern game that felt fresh and new while paying homage to the elements that made Street Fighter II a classic. To give the game a more cinematic flair, short introductory scenes with dialogue sequences were added before fights. These intros vary depending on the characters squaring off, adding a layer of personality and narrative to each encounter. The game retained the traditional 6-button control scheme and gameplay mechanics similar to Super Street Fighter II Turbo. However, two brand new fighting systems were introduced, focus attacks and ultra combos. These innovations added more depth and variety to gameplay. Out of these two new systems, focus attacks allow players to absorb an opponent's moves, and counterattacks unfold in two phases. In Phase 1, players can absorb opponents' moves by holding a button combination. While damage is initially taken, any life lost during this phase is regenerated if Phase 2 is successfully executed. In Phase 2, special moves can be cancelled and converted into focus attacks, at the cost of 2 bars from the Super Combo gauge. According to Ono, the focus attack system was designed to shift the emphasis away from long combos and towards a more strategic approach, likening it to boxing where success depends on reading an opponent's movements. In the past, he stated, "We haven't forgotten about combos and flashy moves, but focus makes it so that you have to read your opponent." Ultra combos was just as much a standout addition to Street Fighter IV, offering players powerful cinematic moves that combined a series of punches, kicks and advanced fighting techniques. Unlike super combos, which required a gauge that filled as players dealt damage, ultra combos relied on the new revenge meter, which filled as players took damage. This mechanic introduced a strategic payback element, allowing players to turn the tide of a match when under pressure. As for first, Street Fighter IV also marked a milestone for the series by being the first Street Fighter game to feature downloadable content, aka DLC. The first expansion pack, Championship Mode, launched free of charge in April 2009. Adding a replay feature, a new point system, and an enhanced tournament matching system. Alongside this, Capcom offered 5 paid DLC packs, each containing alternate costumes for the game's characters, giving players a chance to customize their fighters. The introduction of DLC combined with the game's sleek 3D art style showcased just how much the series had evolved since its last major release. Commenting on this, Yoshinori Ono highlighted how the advent of the internet had transformed the gaming world, stating, "Players could now challenge each other online, get their games delivered digitally, and enjoy unprecedented access to events and tournaments. All of these advances mixed with the excitement of the players themselves creating a whole new scene. This might sound like stuff we all expect today, but back then, this blend of traditional Street Fighter gameplay and modern features made Street Fighter IV a perfect bridge between the franchise's storied past and its future in a rapidly changing gaming landscape." Street Fighter IV received widespread critical acclaim, with GameSpot delivering particularly high praise. They lauded the game's ability to balance technical complexity with accessibility, writing, "Street Fighter IV isn't a success simply because it's one of the most technically complex 2D fighters ever made. It's a success because it's also wrapped inside a layer of absolute accessibility. Never has the old adage, 'a minute to learn, a lifetime to master,' been truer than it is here. Street Fighter 4 will welcome you with open arms, whether you're a lapsed fan concerned you've been out of a loop for too long, or you're dipping your toes in for the first time. Amazing presentation, intricate and enjoyable fighting gameplay, and long-term appeal with online play make Street Fighter 4 undoubtedly one of the finest examples of the fighting genre this generation. GameSpot's review was possibly one of the most glowing ever given to a fighting game, declaring Street Fighter 4 a benchmark for what makes the genre great. IGN shared similar sentiments, praising the game's balance of new visuals and accessible mechanics while retaining the essence of classic Street Fighter. They wrote, "We love 2D and we love Street Fighter 3, but the implementation of the new visual style and more accessible gameplay in Street Fighter 4 is close to flawless. This is classic Street Fighter, steeped in pace, accessible, and yet packed with a truckload of depth. Street Fighter 4 is going to be the game that reinvigorates the series in the eyes of lapsed fans and newcomers alike." Other publications echoed this enthusiasm. PlayStation, the official magazine, awarded the game a perfect 5 out of 5, while official Xbox magazine gave it an impressive 9.5 out of 10 in their February 2009 issue. Giant Bomb also praised Street Fighter 4, giving it 5 out of 5 stars, and stating Street Fighter 4 combines old and new in powerful ways, resulting in a game familiar enough to bring retired fans back into the fold, while being different enough to appeal to players who have stuck with the genre since day one. Eurogamer went even further, awarding a perfect 10 out of 10, writing, "After over a month of playing Street Fighter 4 almost daily, what's become quite clear is that it manages to appeal to a huge range of abilities and tastes without ever compromising its fidelity. This level of universal acclaim cemented Street Fighter 4 as not just a revival of a franchise, but a definitive milestone in fighting game history. As the glowing reviews clearly demonstrate, Street Fighter 4 delivered exactly what Capcom and its developers had envisioned, a modern, cutting-edge game that recaptured the magic of Street Fighter 2. This was nothing less than a masterstroke. Capcom's strategy was executed with near perfection, and Street Fighter once again claimed its position as the king of the fighting game genre, and because of the immense significance that it found, there was of course more Street Fighter 4 goodness to come. That's right, if you know your gaming history, you will know that there is far more than just one version of Street Fighter 4, so let's discuss the next chapter in its story. After the monumental success of Street Fighter 4's release, Capcom were faced with the challenge of deciding what to release next to capitalise on its newly revitalised franchise. The company, keenly aware of its past missteps, knew that simply repeating the old formula of churning out near identical versions of the same game year after year would risk alienating fans. So to avoid repeating the same mistake, Capcom would claim to recognise the importance of maintaining consumer trust. Early on, it was decided that Capcom would refine Street Fighter 4 further, but to avoid disenfranchising fans with too many editions of the same game, Capcom would take great care to reassure consumers in interviews that Super Street Fighter 4 would be the definitive and final version of the game. In fact, they even promised it would improve upon the original in every way without falling into the trap of endless minor updates at a later stage. Hints of Super Street Fighter 4 first appeared in early September 2009, when Capcom teased the project on their official Japanese website. Later that month, the game was officially announced on both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, with Capcom also hinting at the possibility of an arcade release depending on fan demand. In early 2010, Street Fighter 4 producer Yoshinori Ono directly addressed the plans for the new release, firmly stating, "I have no intention of carrying on Street Fighter 4 into Hyper Street Fighter 4 or Ultra Street Fighter 4, because I'm aware of the mistakes Capcom has made in the past. So whether it would be a different IP or another Street Fighter, we'd like to keep options open, but in terms of Street Fighter 4, this is definitive. Super Street Fighter 4 should be the distinctive end. Obviously, there can be updates via DLC, so perhaps in 2011 we could upload a patch for Super Street Fighter 4 2011 edition that would have tuning and balancing, but as a packaged product, this is the last."
You liar!
Capcom's clear communication and promise of finality helped ensure that Super Street Fighter 4 would be seen as a meaningful and worthwhile release, avoiding the pitfalls that had once tarnished the series' reputation previously. The company and its employees were eager to emphasise that Super Street Fighter 4 was a must-purchase, positioning it as the definitive entry in the series. They argued that skipping this game would make little sense, as there wouldn't be an opportunity to buy a more refined version later. After all, Who would want to buy the same fighting game multiple times if you didn't need to? So this raises the question, what changes did Street Fighter 4 bring? Well, like its predecessor, Super Street Fighter 4 features 3D character models and backgrounds while retaining classic 2D plane gameplay. Familiar mechanics such as focus attacks and meters for supers and ultra combos return, but with a significant enhancement. Each character now has at least 2 ultra combos to choose from. There is a caveat though, players can only select 1 ultra combo per match using a system reminiscent of the Super Arts mechanic from Street Fighter 3. Another welcome addition is the return of bonus stages, which allow players to earn extra points. These nostalgic challenges, like smashing up cars and breaking barrels, are a direct callback to Street Fighter 2, adding a touch of retro charm to the game. Super Street Fighter 4 introduced several significant upgrades to its online play, enhancing both its competitive and social appeal. Players could engage in ranked battles, earning online rankings based on their performance to fuel competitive play. Team battles allowed team-ups of up to 4 players to face off against opposing groups, adding a cooperative element to online matches. In Endless Battle, winners remained on to challenge a rotating group of up to 8 players in a lobby-style format. Tournament mode, which replaced Street Fighter 4 Championship mode, enabled players to compete in single elimination bracket tournaments. Finally, the replay channel lets players view and save replays of matches from around the globe, making it easier to study strategies or enjoy highlights from the competitive scene. These additions significantly deepened the game's competitive framework and firmly established Street Fighter 4 as the definitive version of Street Fighter 4 at that point. One of the most exciting updates in this game was the expanded roster, which grew from 25 fighters to an impressive 35. This update introduced 10 additional characters, blending returning favourites with fresh faces. 2 of the new additions, DJ and T-Hawk, were the final characters from Street Fighter 2, who had been omitted from the original Street Fighter 4 due to time constraints. Fans of Final Fight, a game we touched on earlier in this video, were thrilled to see Cody and Guy return to the franchise for the first time since the Alpha series. Meanwhile, Adon, a classic character from the original Street Fighter from '87 and the Alpha games, made his triumphant return too. The game also welcomed 3 characters from Street Fighter 3, Ibuki, Makoto and Dudley, all making their Street Fighter 4 debuts. These additions expanded the diversity of the roster and provided fans of the often overlooked Street Fighter 3 series with something to cheer about. And out of these, Dudley quickly became a huge fan favourite. In addition to the returning fighters, Super Street Fighter 4 introduced 2 brand new characters. Hakan, a Turkish oil wrestler, added a touch of humour and originality to the game as he sought to prove that Turkish oil wrestling is the greatest fighting style in the world. The second newcomer, Juri, brought a darker edge to the roster. A South Korean taekwondo fighter working for the Shadow Intimidation Network. Juri posed a unique ability thanks to the Feng Shui engine, a device implanted in her left eye. Juri became the most iconic character introduced to Street Fighter since the legendary Street Fighter 2, thanks to her unique design, personality and gameplay. Functioning as a dark counterpart to Chun-Li, her sadistic personality, marked by her playful yet menacing attitude, made her stand out immediately. Her compelling combination of charisma, visual appeal and unique playstyle ensured she transcended her debut in this game, cementing her place as one of the franchise's most memorable and enduring characters ever, even if as of Street Fighter 6 she is mostly famous for her feat. The game also introduced a handful of new stage backdrops, adding a fresh visual touch to the Super Street Fighter 4 experience. Among these are stunning locations like a solar eclipse over an African savanna, a Metro City stage featuring Final Fight characters, and several others that enrich the game's atmosphere. On release, IGN summarised their verdict on the game, concluding that even if it doesn't have the same kind of revitalising effect on the genre as its predecessor, Super Street Fighter 4 is an easy recommendation. It's a superior version of one of the best fighting games around, offering a huge cast of 35 characters along with a far more developed online suite compared to the original version. The gameplay is fast, fun and easy to dig into, yet deep enough that you're always discovering new ways to chain combos and improve your skills. Whether you're a franchise veteran or a total newcomer, you can't go wrong with Super Street Fighter 4. GameSpot was equally enthusiastic, stating, "Super Street Fighter 4 stands tall on the broad shoulders of its predecessor. Its large and diverse character roster, balance tweaks, and comprehensive online play reaffirm its place as one of the best fighters of this generation. It's a worthy upgrade even if you own last year's version. The results are improvements in every aspect of the game, making this a must-have for series fans and internet brawlers alike." Across the board, the response to Super Street Fighter 4 was overwhelmingly positive. Most publications agreed that the game was worth the purchase, as it not only refined but expanded upon the excellent experience delivered by its predecessor. The positive reception to Super Street Fighter 4 led Capcom to fulfill one of their promises, releasing the game in arcades if there was enough demand. However, this arcade version raised questions about whether the home console release was truly the ultimate version, as Capcom had claimed. After all, the arcade edition added Street Fighter 3 twins Yun and Yang, alongside hidden bosses Evil Ryu and Oni, further expanding the roster. This new version eventually made its way to home consoles, effectively undermining the idea that Super Street Fighter 4 was the final edition of the game, which was certainly a bit naughty if you ask me. What's more is that in addition to the arcade edition, Super Street Fighter 4 3D edition was announced at E3 2010 as a launch title of the Nintendo 3DS. While this version was a scaled down port designed for the handheld's limited hardware compared to the Xbox 360 and PS3, it introduced several interesting new features. One of its most notable additions was the dynamic view, which utilised the 3DS's stereoscopic 3D capabilities to provide an over-the-shoulder camera angle, giving fights a fresh and visually engaging perspective. The game also introduced figure collecting mode, which allowed players to collect in-game character figurines and battle them using the system's Street Pass functionality. This feature added a fun, passive multiplayer element that capitalised on the unique hardware of the 3DS. Additionally, the game retained the full roster of Street Fighter 4, ensuring that players didn't miss out on the extensive character selection. It also offered online multiplayer, allowing for competitive battles on the go, which was a rarity for handheld fighting games at the time. Even if we try to pretend that the arcade and 3D versions of Super Street Fighter 4 aren't examples of Yoshinori Ono going back on his word of not making any more editions of Street Fighter 4, we definitely can't say the same about this game. At the 2013 Evolution Championship Series, Capcom announced Ultra Street Fighter 4, an updated version of the game set for release in 2014, carrying the very title that Yoshinori Ono promised would never be released. This iteration introduced a host of new features to expand the Street Fighter 4 experience further. Among the additions were new stages and characters including Rolento, Eleanor, Hugo, Poison and DeCapri, who made her playable debut in the franchise. The Edition Select feature allowed players to choose different versions of characters based on their properties from previous iterations of Street Fighter 4, similar to what Hyper Street Fighter 2 had offered years earlier. Another major addition was Ultra Combo Ws, which let players access both of their characters' Ultra Combos during a match, albeit at the cost of reduced damage. The game also introduced several new mechanics to deepen its strategic elements. Delayed Wake Up allowed players to adjust the timing of their recovery after being knocked down, making it harder for opponents to predict their next move. Meanwhile, Red Focus enhanced the focus attack system by offering increased invincibility and the ability to absorb multiple hits. These changes, combined with the various balance tweaks, further refined the gameplay, ensuring that Ultra Street Fighter 4 stood out as a polished and highly competitive entry in the series. But still, why did this game exist when Yoshinori Ono specifically promised us it never would? Well, reflecting on Yoshinori Ono's earlier claims that Super Street Fighter 4 would be the final version fans would ever need to purchase, it's fair to say he employed a bit of creative interpretation. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi once said, everything he told us was true from a certain point of view. It was basically a massive lie, demonstrating to us that Capcom's decision to release yet another version proved that even seemingly the most sincere promises in the gaming world can have a flexible shelf life, provided there's money on the table. But there is some nuance here, I guess, so let's discuss that. You see, Ultra Street Fighter 4 was priced at $40 for new buyers, but Capcom also offered a $15 digital upgrade for players who already owned Super Street Fighter 4. This approach meant that fans didn't necessarily have to buy a whole new physical product to experience the latest version, making it an accessible upgrade for most. So while Super Street Fighter 4 wasn't the definitive final edition of the game, as originally promised, Capcom's affordable upgrade path lent some truth to Ono's earlier statements. In its early days, Ultra Street Fighter 4 seemed to be well received, but it wasn't long before things started to go downhill. To understand how this happened, we need to revisit the early years of the PlayStation 4. Unlike previous console generations, the first couple of years on the PS4 felt like a drought for new games. Rather than getting to enjoy many new experiences, instead gamers were snapping up re-releases of PS3 games like GTA 5 and The Last of Us, with idiots buying them all over again. Given Capcom's reputation as the undisputed champions of releasing endless iterations of their games, it was only a matter of time before Ultra Street Fighter 4 was ported to the PS4 as well. However, the problem was that the version they delivered was nothing short of an unmitigated disaster. The PS4 port of Ultra Street Fighter 4 turned out to be a train wreck, especially compared to how smoothly it ran on far less powerful systems. The internet quickly filled with scathing reviews expressing outrage and disgust at the shoddy state of the game. Yuck. Reports described a litany of bugs, glitches and performance issues. Eurogamer and Digital Foundry thoroughly documented the fiasco, highlighting problems like the game's menu system, which became a sluggish, choppy mess with every frame displaying at half the intended rate. Eurogamer highlighted additional issues, stating, "In one stage we encountered a stuck sound effect that kept repeating, while a couple of minor UI bugs appeared in other areas. We even experienced one crash during a training session that booted us back to the console front end. However, a look at various message boards confirms that others are running into even more severe issues, including additional sound errors, missing visual effects, online connectivity problems, and other oddities." They concluded that every other version of Ultra Street Fighter 4 outperformed the PS4 port by a considerable margin. Push Square expanded on this critique, lambasting the PS4 version for being marketed as the ultimate way to experience Street Fighter 4, while failing miserably to live up to that promise. The Guardian echoed this sentiment, awarding the port a dismal 2 out of 5 stars. Their review criticised Capcom's apparent disregard for quality, stating, "Sadly, the quality of the port falls some way short of Capcom's in-house standards. Menus are jerky, music skips, moves are buggy and broken, and to top it all off, it suffers from input lag. An issue the PS4 version was promoted as having fixed over the PS3 iteration. There's really no excuse for such poor performance." To underscore just how badly the port was received, it was pulled from both Capcom's Pro Tour and EVO 2015 events that Sony themselves was sponsoring. In an ironic twist, the competition instead featured the Xbox 360 version of the game, leaving Capcom and Sony red-faced. This disastrous misstep turned what should have been a celebration of a franchise into an embarrassment for everyone involved. Capcom Unity was eventually forced to address the controversy, releasing a statement to reassure the competitive community. A lot of our more competitive players have wondered how the Ultra Street Fighter 4 version on PS4 will affect them and the tour. To that, we'd like to advise that the integrity of the Capcom Pro Tour is a top priority for us, and we will continue to work with tournament organisers worldwide to ensure that the highest quality event will be run. The statement continued, "Each region will maintain its current hardware standard for the remainder of the 2015 Capcom Pro Tour until otherwise announced. We will keep you updated as to when the PS4 version of Ultra Street Fighter 4 will be integrated into the Pro Tour." SCEA and Capcom are currently looking into the issues that some users may be experiencing and are working to resolve them as quickly as possible. For many, the blame for the PS4 version's dismal quality fell squarely on Other Ocean Interactive, the third-party company responsible for the botched port. It begs the question, why do companies with Ocean in their name so often churn out butchered ports of beloved classics? It's like there's a whole ocean of bad game developers who work for companies called Ocean. As highlighted in this video, it's easy to see why players were so enraged. Not only was the PS4 version marketed as the definitive edition of Ultra Street Fighter 4, but it was specifically promoted as the premium Ultra experience. Instead, players were greeted with a shoddy mess, masquerading as an upgrade. Small wonder that the community responded with such widespread outrage. After several patches, many of the issues were eventually ironed out. However, it's absolutely baffling to me that companies continue to release half-baked games. The Ultra Street Fighter 4 PS4 port is especially embarrassing when you consider that the original version of the game was already 6 years old by that point. There's simply no excuse. This port should have been flawless and tournament ready from the moment it launched. Instead, players were handed a mess that tarnished the game's reputation and left a sour taste in the mouths of fans. Due to this, Ultra Street Fighter 4 holds a complicated legacy within the fighting game community. On one hand, it represents the pinnacle of Street Fighter 4, with its refined mechanics, expanded roster and balanced gameplay, making it a favourite among competitive players. However, its reputation was marred by the disastrous PS4 port, which became a cautionary tale of rushed development and the pitfalls of outsourcing. Despite this blemish, the game remains a beloved entry in the franchise, remembered more for its contributions to the evolution of fighting games than its unfortunate missteps. It's a testament to how a strong core experience can withstand even the most embarrassing setbacks. But amusingly, there is still one more version of this game that also needs addressing: Street Fighter 4 Champion Edition. Yes, this really is a thing. Street Fighter 4 Champion Edition was released as a mobile port of Ultra Street Fighter 4, designed to bring the iconic game to smartphones and tablets while catering to both casual players and fans of a series who wanted a portable version. It launched for iOS and Android, offering a robust fighting experience optimised for touchscreens and mobile hardware. The primary reason for its creation was accessibility and the potential to tap into a broader market. By 2017, mobile gaming had become a dominant force, and Capcom saw an opportunity to introduce Street Fighter 4 to a wider audience, including casual gamers who may not own a console or PC. Champion Edition included 25 playable characters at launch, with additional fighters added via updates, and featured simplified controls to make the game more approachable while retaining the depth that fans of the series expected. Though it wasn't a replacement for the full console experience, Street Fighter 4 Champion Edition served as a gateway for new players to enter the world of Street Fighter, albeit an utterly bizarre one. Its existence also demonstrated Capcom's willingness to adapt its legacy titles to modern platforms, giving the game new life and extending its reach beyond traditional gaming audiences. Despite the limitations of mobile hardware, it was praised for its faithful recreation of the core gameplay and its solid online multiplayer mode, which allow players to test their skills on the go. There was a time when it seemed like Street Fighter 4 might never exist, as Capcom had grown hesitant about revisiting the series after the declining popularity of fighting games in the early 2000s. Yet, against the odds, Street Fighter 4 not only revived the franchise, but also reinvigorated the entire genre, bringing it back into the mainstream spotlight. Despite its ups and downs, including some missteps with ports and updates, the game deserves immense respect for its innovation, its impact on competitive gameplay, and its role in rekindling the love for fighting games around the world. With Street Fighter 6 standing tall as one of the most popular titles in the fighting game scene, it's incredible to reflect on how far the series has come, especially when there was once doubt that Street Fighter 4 would ever even happen. And speaking of keeping the momentum going, don't forget that right now you can snag a massive discount on Street Fighter 6, including its Ultimate Edition, which features the Year 1 Character Pass. Plus, using my links, you'll gain access to thousands of gaming deals, like 32% off the Year 2 Ultimate Pass, with the iconic Mai Shiranui soon joining the roster as a fully playable character. Treat yourself to these amazing savings and kick off the new year in style. Happy gaming and happy shopping. Yeah! Cheerio!